It's the morning of May 10th, 2011. We're at the Eagleton Institute of Politics at Rutgers. I'm Michael Aron of NJN News. We're here for the Thomas H. Kane Archive of the Center on the American Governor. We're going to continue our series of discussions with people who worked closely with Governor Kane. This morning we're going to talk to Rick Goldstein. Rick was Commissioner of Health from 1983 to 1986. He is and has been for the last 10 years the CEO of the New Jersey Council of Teaching Hospitals. Good morning, Rick.
Good morning, Michael.
Where did you grow up?
Cleveland, Ohio.
Cleveland. And your bio says you went to Case Western Reserve University?
Yes.
And then to med school?
Exactly, Ohio State in Columbus, Ohio.
Uh-huh. And then to Harvard for architecture?
Well, first there was the military. We had the United States Air Force for a couple of years.
Vietnam?
I was in Vietnam many times.
Did you serve during the Vietnam War?
Well, yes, I was during the Vietnam War as a flight surgeon based in Charleston, South Carolina, and we had a worldwide mission. We had what they call the Military Airlift Command back in those days, but they were flying the C-5As. These were these huge airplanes. And they also had the medical evacuation responsibilities, other planes that had been converted into flying ambulances. So I spent a fair amount of time flying in and out of Vietnam.
Performing surgery on people?
No, just because you have the word surgeon in the name. There were lots of titles. Flight surgeon was responsible for the care of personnel that flew. It's really taking care of people that have an environment where their barometric pressures are changing. So it could be submarine, airplanes. But there's these situations affect human performance, and it's important that the physicians and the people that do these jobs have an understanding of how that works.
So after the military, you went to Harvard?
After the military, I went to Harvard.
A guy with a medical degree goes for an architecture degree? That is unusual.
Yeah, it's happened a couple of times, but it is unusual.
Why did you do that?
Well, the goal was to improve the therapeutic environment of hospitals. They were a mess then; they're still a mess now, really. But it seemed to me that I could help deliver more medical care by changing the efficiency of the environment and making the spaces that people worked in more therapeutic. That would be a better contribution than simply seeing one patient at a time.
So you finished getting that degree in 75, I think your bio says?
I think so,
yeah. How did you come to be the health commissioner of New Jersey 8 years later? What happened in the intervening period of time?
That's really weird. I agree with you. There was no expectation. There was no planning for this kind of a thing. But it turns out, oddly enough, that I had the right skill set for the job. I mean, that really is fascinating. The commissioner's job in New Jersey, which has both a public health component and a hospital component. And in the hospital component, the issues in those days were capital expansion, a certificate of need. They were building like crazy. And so to have an individual who's familiar with the construction from soup to nuts, from space programming to design development to construction, et cetera, and how that whole industry operates, was really very helpful. I also had the public health training by virtue of being a physician and working in those kinds of environments. So I was uniquely suited, and I also had a very special interest in management. Many of my clients were not only hospitals. We had worked for many for-profit organizations, such as Exxon Research and Engineering. We planned the facility in Clinton, New Jersey, the firm that I had founded. So in those environments, it was just my own interest. I was very interested in how management got things done. And I became kind of like an anthropologist of management as to how different organizations behaved, and they all behaved differently. And eventually it became clear that it was a leadership issue, that whoever was at the top of the pyramid was going to set the culture, and that culture behaved differently in different organizations. So when I had the opportunity to join the health department, I was saying, hey, this is a whole new environment. I can't wait.
Well, what did you do between 75 and 83? You said you make reference to a company that...
Yeah, I started my career working for a consultant firm in New York City. And they were in the business of planning hospitals. They weren't in the business of designing hospitals. The architects were going to design them. But before they get designed, somebody had to tell the architect, well, what do you want built? And that question is a complicated question to answer because it eventually gets into how many operating rooms do you need, how many beds do you need, how big should your laboratory, how big is X-ray. It's a complicated environment, and the architect needs to know what the client wants built. So a consultant is usually retained in advance of the architect. And so that's what that firm that I joined did, and it gave me an opportunity to get a bigger picture of how the hospitals were put together.
What was the name of that firm?
E.D. Rosenfeld Associates.
And did you stay with it until your appointment?
No, I was there a couple of years, and I was young and aggressive and anxious to get on with it. So I formed my own firm, actually with Bill Parker.
Bill Parker is a mutual friend of ours.
Right, that's when we hooked up. He was teaching architecture at Columbia, and he later brought me in to be an instructor in that program. But we formed a firm called GPR Planners Collaborative. The GP&R stood for the three founders of the firm. And it was our goal to do hospital planning and design consultation. We didn't necessarily want to produce architectural working drawings. We figured other people could do that. But we wanted to conceptualize what the project would look like and assist the architects in laying it out so that it would make good sense and work efficiently.
And where was that firm located?
We were in White Plains at the time. And it turned out, an interesting twist of fate, that we got a project, actually I think it was the Exxon project, was the first one, which was a laboratory project. And they liked the philosophy of our firm, which was very scientifically organized. We did projections, because we were in a hospital environment. How many CBCs did you do? How many patients did you see? How many urines did you collect? And so when it came to the research environment at Exxon, they were all scientists, and they all liked the fact that we had methodology to project the space needs. They had worked in a building. They converted every space into laboratory. There was no men's room left, no ladies' rooms left. Everything had been converted. And they always kept growing, and so they wanted somebody that could project the amount of space that they would need well into the future. And as a result of that project, we became known as the firm to go to for laboratory planning and design. And that was a good news, bad news story. We did these projects, animal laboratories for Mobil Oil and Abbott Labs and all over the country. We were flying, we'd do 3 presentations a day. I mean, we were just everywhere. But the problem with it was I had no particular interest in laboratory planning. It was not a good use of my skill sets at that time. It was just too focused. And laboratories, when you really got into studying, weren't that interesting anyway. There were only 3 or 4 possible designs, and you were done. You just had to decide how wide the corridors were, whether you're going to put a human being in it, and whether or not you wanted drawers. And you were basically done. Now, there wasn't anything else to think about. So I had to move on. We were terribly successful, but this isn't why I'd gone through all this training to do that. So I elected to move on, and while I was in the process of moving on is when things changed. And what changed was that I happened to meet Phil Kaltenbacher. Phil had been a very close friend of the governor. They had traveled together in the car when they came to the State House, and I think Phil had a divorce and was staying at Governor Kane's house or some attachment to the house. So I happened to meet Phil at a dinner party, and we were simply chatting, and he learned something about me, etc. We got along nicely, and that was that. So, but it was a surprise when 2 months later I get a call to say, "Hey."
From whom?
I think it was Phil. I believe it was Phil. I think at that time he was chairman of the Republican Party.
State Party chairman, and he and Kane had been running mates in the Assembly 10 years earlier or thereabouts.
Right. They were very close friends. They were very close. So Phil asked if I'd like to be deputy commissioner, and I said, "Thank you very much. It's nice to hear from you." And I said, "No, thanks."
Why?
But I said, if the commissioner should open up, give me a call back.
Why didn't you want to be deputy commissioner?
Well, it wasn't on my to-do list anyway to go into government. I mean, I was interviewing at that time to join a major architectural firm in St. Louis. I figured I'd get more into design and less into conceptualization. And I wanted to work on really big projects. I wanted to work on the $500 million projects now. I really wanted to take a step away from what I'd been doing. We had been doing some replacement hospitals, but they hadn't been huge. It's a different type of company, that gets these kinds of projects. And so I wanted to work for a company that had a track record of getting these mega projects, and that's why I was going to St. Louis. And it was during that period of my life that I met Phil. And 2 months later, after he offered me the deputy, he did call me back and say, "Okay, would you like to be commissioner?"
What did you say?
I said, "Well, let's talk."
Who'd you talk with? Him?
Well, I had to go in for an interview, as I recall. It seemed to me that even though it would be a detour in what I wanted to do in life, it wouldn't be such a bad detour. It would get my name out there, and then I could go after the commissionership. I could go on and keep designing hospitals. So it made some sense. And
How old were you?
I don't know. We have to do the math.
83.
And I'm born in 41, so
So you were 42 years old.
42.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Did you meet Tom Kane at some point before you were
I don't-
selected? Do you know?
I don't recall. I don't think so. I think I met Phil, and then I think the next stop was Lou Thurston. I could be
Chief of Staff.
yeah, I could be wrong. I mean, it's a long time ago, but I think I met Lou, and I remember he kept me waiting a long time. I wasn't happy about that. Because he had Herschel Walker in his office, the football player who had just agreed to sign onto some team that was going to play in the Meadowlands or something like that.
World football.
World football, and so he was chatting it up with him, so I had to wait.
It's kind of a daunting job to walk into from no major administrative experience, was it not?
Well, I had knowledge of the health department by virtue of the work I had been doing, because the hospitals needed certificates of need. And so I had been in a position where I'd be preparing certificates of need for New Jersey hospitals. I had also worked on projects in New Jersey. I worked on the Newark Beth Israel project for 2 or 3 years, or when I was with the E.D. Rosenfeld firm. And so I had knowledge of the organization, at least the physical facility side of the organization I had knowledge of. And so that didn't really worry me. At that time, the issues, I guess not unlike now, were cost. They were always talking about how expensive it was, but on our watch, we managed to control costs very well. Well, New Jersey, this is one of the accomplishments that people don't tend to talk about as much as perhaps they should. And it was an absolutely amazing accomplishment of the Kane administration. Now, it had its roots in the previous administration. Joanne Finley had been the commissioner, and really she deserved 99.9% of the credit on this. But they had in that administration, the Byrne administration, they had a vision that there's another way to price health care. Instead of just pricing it by the piece, they said, let's price it by the diagnosis. So that was a big change in it. And so they got various grants and a waiver from the federal government. The federal government wanted to work on this project with them. And they developed what became known as the DRG system here in New Jersey.
Diagnostic-related
Groups. Right. And so the pricing would be based on, you had an appendectomy, and there's a fixed price for that. And it became more sophisticated over time. I think there were like 471 diagnoses. I don't know how many there are today, but it grew. But it seemed to be an effective way because it gave the hospitals a different motivation. Rather than just keep them in the hospital as long as you could and provide as many tests as you could, you were getting paid one flat sum of money. And so you better be well organized and get them out quick, get all these testing done and get the patient out if you intend to make a profit on it. So it worked. And as a result of it working, the federal government said, it's working in New Jersey, it can work for us. And Medicare, in a very short order, converted to the DRG system, and still to this day, this is how they run it.
That is quite revolutionary. In a way, it's the precursor of managed care, is it not?
No, it wasn't managed care. It was just a pricing system. What they're talking about today, which is the modification of it, is bundling. And this is very difficult to accomplish, but the bundling means that the physician fee and the hospital fee are rolled into one. So there's a lump sum payment, and then the hospital and the physician has to work out who gets how much. But they've kept them separate up to this time. There have been some experiments, and then really these experiments have been done in New Jersey, bundling. And when we look at what the Obama plan is even today with accountable care organizations, it's basically going to be involved in bundling. It's going to be not just rolling in the physician's fee, but they intend to roll in the entire continuity of health care into that system. So that it's the preventive care, it's the physician visit, it's the procedure you have, it's the post-op care. There's supposed to be a continuity of care. So, but New Jersey proved that this approach, this billing procedure, had validity. And while it was created by the previous administration, the Kane administration had the responsibility to get it up and running. And we did that efficiently, effectively, so that the federal government said, we like the way this works.
Who fought back against it?
It did. It was removed from New Jersey. It eventually the legislature repealed it. These things need champions, and there were several tactical errors that just were not foreseen in it. One of the elements of that was that the hospitals were required to send a bill or to include in their bill not just what the DRG charge was, but what the per diem charges would have been if we didn't have it. And they didn't spend a lot of money developing systems, cost accounting systems, to give them the right answer because it didn't matter. So, but the unions felt every time they looked at a bill that the DRG price was always higher than if they were in the per diem. So that's what happens when you see two numbers, right? Over time you say, I like the lower number better. And so after the Kane administration, after a period of time, it just lost support. There weren't champions in the government. There weren't people really knowledgeable about it. And frankly, New Jersey would have been much better off all these years if they had kept this program. Because what this program did, in addition to being a sane billing procedure, the system, because it was a total system, allowed for the uncompensated care cost to be ground into the bill and spread out over a wider base. So the hospitals were being paid for charity care. They were being paid to educate doctors, what we call the graduate medical education expenses. So everything was being paid for. So the hospitals, this was a great system for them.
When you joined the department, was DRG in place, or you had to?
It had been, there was a demonstration project. I think it was in 8 or 10 hospitals at that time. We had to scale it up.
Did the hospitals resist it at the beginning?
There was a movement in America to go competitive, and to throw out certificate of need. The capital system is going to take it. The marketplace is going to work for hospitals. Let's compete. Let's get rid of all the rules. And so there was a good segment of the hospital industry where the CEO said, "Yeah, we can do this. We can compete." They were wrong. It was a mistake on their part. And I think if they look back on it, they would have much rather have had the DRG system.
The certificate of need system, if you wanted to build or buy some piece of equipment, you needed the state's approval?
Yeah, there were a lot of rules surrounding it as to what the cutoff and the price was. There are certain types of equipment. At one point early on, they wanted to control the number of CAT scans. It used to be said New Jersey has more CAT scans than Canada. I assume probably we have 10 times as many now. It never worked. It never worked.
The certificate of need process didn't work?
No. The politically powerful and wealthy always won. Every time. Every time. They put a better case together. Maybe they're more deserving. I'm simply saying this, but everybody got whatever they wanted. Nobody ever said no.
And does this system survive till this day, or did this go by the wayside?
No, this went by the wayside when they wanted to streamline it and make it more competitive. There are still some programs that have certificate of need, but they no longer interfere with for example, I think the trauma care system requires a certificate of need. If you want to become a trauma hospital, you have regulations you have to meet, and so there's some others that still have CN. But in terms of major mission of hospital, you want to build a replacement hospital, I think you pretty much can do that.
Were you interested in government and politics before joining
No.
the administration?
No.
Were you interested in government and politics once you joined the administration?
Not really. I always saw myself as a manager of a health department with a dual responsibility, one to the governor and one to the state of New Jersey, the people, the citizenry. And fortunately with this governor, the two never came into conflict, but with other governors, they clearly have.
What did you think of this governor?
When people ask me that, I always say Tom Kane's a Boy Scout. It was like working for a fellow that has the values of a Boy Scout. And a very smart man, very thoughtful, but he wasn't highly prescriptive in what he asked me to do. It really came down to do the right thing, that good politics is good government. So philosophically, the politics never entered into what I was doing, with the exception maybe of the needle exchange program, which as a health department we were always in favor of as a mechanism to control the dissemination of the AIDS virus. But that was a political issue for them, that somehow giving people needles is going to encourage them, the drug addiction, or support the habit, and philosophically that wasn't something I wanted to be seen as doing.
So you couldn't get anywhere on that issue?
No, that was a no-no. We were not effective on fluoridation of water. But that wasn't from the front office. They had nothing to do with it. It was just, the more we talked about it, then cities would stop fluoridating that were fluoridating, so we decided we better get out of that. We weren't helping.
Was it a good department when you walked in?
Yeah, no, it was a talent department. Because of the waiver they had from the federal government, a lot of really smart people wanted to work on that DRG project. So the health department, New Jersey was leading the nation when it came to innovation in healthcare. Not unlike what Massachusetts has done with healthcare reform a few years ago. I mean, they're just pace-setting. New Jersey had that reputation. We were an innovator. And on the Tom Kane watch, we continued that innovation.
DRG is big. What else was big?
Well, I was thinking about this as I was driving over here. We had just a high number of public health issues to deal with. I don't think that there's been another period like it. We had AIDS, we had asbestos, we had dioxin, we had EDB.
What's EDB?
Ethylene dibromide. It was a spray that was put on food, and all the food had to be washed. The vegetables that came into this country as a way of preserving things, and they came in container ships. We were just constantly running. It was the public health side that really kept us busy. And Carol Golden actually gave my department, credit for the governor's second reelection, because he was seen in an iron-bound bar with his sleeves rolled up, explaining to the people in that bar what dioxin was and why the state needed to get involved and what the plan was going to be going forward.
And what was the health department's role in that?
Well, we worked with DEP, but we were going to do physicals on the residents in the area to make certain that they weren't toxic from the dioxin. We coordinated with DEP to make certain that the ground was going to clean up, a Superfund kind of thing.
I remember as a journalist when dioxin was discovered, the declaration was almost like World War III had happened that day. It was, oh my God,
right.
There's dioxin in the Passaic River in Newark.
Right.
People are going to die. The governor immediately came up to Newark that day.
Right.
And maybe that was the day he went into the bar. I think it was the day he went into the bar.
We had
the number of news crews following him was vast.
We had briefed him. He knew what he was talking about.
Were you there?
Yeah.
You were there?
Oh, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Now, it turns out it was an overblown emergency when you think back on it. It dawned on me it must have been an overblown emergency when I think there was some Russian president who was poisoned with dioxin. His face broke out in hives and pimples and all this kind of stuff, but he didn't die. and the federal government criteria is 1 part per billion. Right, and like 1 teaspoon is going to, of impregnated soil is going to kill you. I mean, that's what we were dealing with, and we tried to reduce that as much as we could because we just felt we were overreacting, so we can react intelligently. So we cleaned it up, but we didn't go crazy.
Governor Kane says that some of his cabinet were complete strangers to him. Were you one of them?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We never. He must have interviewed me. I do recall the interview. It's coming back to me now. We did interview in his office or in that cabinet room that was next to his office, and he asked me, about health care and what the issues were and that sort of thing. And so we had a very pleasant conversation. He was satisfied that he had used a search firm to fill all these other positions, and so after the current commissioner had resigned, there was an opening. And suddenly this became a news story, the search for a health commissioner. All right? And nobody in state was going to be acceptable because somebody knew that they weren't good. I mean, it didn't matter who it was. If you were in state, you weren't going to be acceptable.
Why? There have to have been leaders in the healthcare field.
Just the way it was back then, there was nobody in New Jersey that was going to be acceptable to some constituency. Either the doctors would blackball him or the hospitals or him or her or whatever it was. So he had to be from out of state, really, to come in. And because of that, there's a big drum roll. I was on the cover of the Star Ledger. I mean, for a health commissioner, we're back page news at best. And yet in New Jersey, it was a big deal, my coming on board.
Do you think he was concerned about you?
I have no idea. Should have been.
Let's talk about AIDS for a second. You say that the AIDS epidemic was just...
It was just getting started. Then we're back in 1983, 84, and they're just identifying the virus. I hired a deputy commissioner, Jack Rutledge, who eventually succumbed to the disease. And very quickly, this was before all these retroviral agents were available. He got the job because they knew he'd be focused on that issue.
He had the disease when you hired him?
Apparently, yeah.
But did you know that?
No, didn't know that. Huh. Yeah, but it went quick. It was a very tragic death.
What did the health department do to stem the spread of AIDS?
It was mostly an awareness program back then, and it was the tension was in the schools because there wasn't really well known how it was spread. We did know there was evidence that you could culture it from tears and saliva, these kinds of things, and so naturally people felt, well, kissing must spread it. There's no indication that kissing does spread it.
You mean in those days it wasn't known that it was simply sexually transmitted?
Right, right. There was a lot of misinformation about it, and when I had to tell the parents that a child who was positive is still going to go back to kindergarten and be mainstreamed, it met with quite a bit of opposition because young children bite. So this was a lot of tension back in those days. There were auditoriums filled with angry people over the health department's position to mainstream.
And who was in the front of the auditorium, you or the governor?
Me.
Yeah?
Oh, yeah. Oh, went with the job. It was a health department issue. We wanted to do needle exchange, but there were a whole bunch of things around privacy, because this was like a fatal diagnosis back then. And so, if you're going to do testing and set up a registry, why do that unless you have something to offer people? So there's a lot of debate about what the right strategies were going forward, recognizing there was no treatment at that time.
Tell us about asbestos. What was known at that point in time?
Well, there was quite a bit known. Asbestos has been around mankind for centuries, I suppose. The researchers at Mount Sinai would get the most credit for identifying which asbestos fibers cause the most disease. And asbestos associated with a smoker is a fatal combination. It leads to rapid formation of mesotheliomas, which is a fatal lung disease. John Mansell had been a company in New Jersey that was in the business of making asbestos products. They were used primarily in pipe wrapping, in boiler plants, and a variety of spaces where heat and or fire were concerns, and it had great properties in terms of being used for those things. It was also found in ceilings, soundproofing. I mean, it was everywhere in our environment. And the crisis came in the Kane administration when, first it started, I think, with the schools, that the federal government had allowed for some money to be spent for schools to investigate whether or not they had an asbestos problem. But they weren't paying for any removal of asbestos at that time. They were just, do you have it? So it turned out they all had it, and the parents were very upset once it was discovered, and they didn't want it in their buildings, and they wanted it removed forthwith. So it created a certain funding problem. But the problem for the health department was the training of the workers that would be removing it. Because as an industry started up, as funds became available for schools to remove it, the contractors would go in and take it out. And they were hiring really college kids just wearing shorts, completely exposed, no mask, no nothing, no proper techniques, and that they would put it into a bag and throw it out. I mean, that was their system. And the unions first became aware of it. The pipe fitters union or steam fitters union, they felt that they should have a lock on this work, that they were the only ones qualified to deal with it, and they brought in a video to show the college students, being abused really by the contractors.
Brought it into you?
Brought it into the governor. I was invited to a meeting in the governor's office, and we watched this video, and they're making the case, appropriately so, that this is the wrong thing to do. You can end up killing these people that are removing it. It's getting in the air. Everything is wrong about this, and there's a proper way to do it. So they were right, but we didn't want to give them the total lock on the market. We figured that what we needed to do was set up training programs in the health department and train workers in how to properly remove it, and have the contractors get certified that they were doing this properly. So that was the route we took.
You would think that could be a DEP project, not a health department project, removing of a toxic substance.
We were involved. I don't remember at this date, the interface of the departments on that, but I assume I worked with Bob Huey on it and his team, that we were working as a team.
You think the department did an effective job of getting asbestos out of the schools?
Well, I don't. That wasn't my issue as to whether or not we got an effective job out. I was interested in keeping the workers healthy, and I think we did that. I assume that with the testing, they did in fact get the asbestos out. And it was never a danger, by the way. Let's understand this. It's not a danger as long as it sits there not moving. So if it's been glued or wrapped around a pipe, it's fine. It's not going anywhere. It's only when you want to work on that pipe that you take off the asbestos wrap that you put it in the air.
So removing it from a building was more dangerous than having it in the building.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Which is why we tried to slow it down. But absolutely.
I see here on the list of the issues that you put on your bio that you dealt with the most during these years, something called the Hospital of the Future Project. What is that?
Well, that was my architectural background. I had to spend a little bit of time on that, and Bill Parker was my assistant commissioner for facilities. And so we went over to the financing authority, and we said, we have a project. You folks fund all these construction projects, and we'd like to work on the Hospital of the Future. What should it look like? How do we build flexibility? All the issues involved in developing a modern physical plant. And so we did that. We produced some papers at conferences, and we explained to the world what it could be like.
And are the hospitals today anything like the hospitals you envisioned?
No.
How so?
There's a different planning process. It's very personal how a hospital decides how to expand, what architect to use. It's not like there's just one body of information that we all go to and say, here's the way to do it.
Were you wasting your time engaging in an academic exercise?
Perhaps. Perhaps, but we felt good doing it.
How were your relations with the Hospital Association when you were commissioner?
I think they were basically friendly, as I recall. I don't really recall that we had any major issues. I mean, we were doing the DRGs, and there would be issues that would affect all the hospitals, like rebasing, redoing shuffling all the numbers, or making them, instead of 1978 numbers going to 1982 numbers, these kinds of things. But I don't recall any battles with NJHA.
How about the Medical Society?
Well, the Medical Society was a different animal, and they still are. they have never represented all the physicians. They represent a subset of physicians, and that subset to me are physicians that like to go to meetings and make points and talk. But they were always interested in the private practice of medicine, and that was their focus, that was their interest, and they were not interested in social experiments to improve efficiency or do things differently or organize differently. They were happy with whatever the system was, and any changes were going to be bad. And that was their point of view, and still is.
Who did you interact with in the governor's office? The governor? Who did you plug into? Who did you have communication with?
Well, there was a reasonable camaraderie throughout the administration, throughout the cabinet. And I was a few months late in joining them, so I always felt I was a little behind the curve. I became closest to Bob Huey initially because we shared a room at the Great Gorge at the Playboy Club when the governor had his first retreat. So Bob was very helpful to me because I had been in the military, and when you join, at least in the Air Force, I'm sure they all work the same, there would be some kind of a master sergeant or a warrant officer or something to say, this is the way it works. This is what you can do, this is how we do it, these are the rules, etc. And you were, aside from an indoctrination that you got with the Air Force, your chief master sergeant knew exactly how to order supplies and whatever needed to be done. But each department in the government functioned differently. It was a major surprise to me because my people would say you can't do this, and Bob Huey's people were saying yes you can. So I wanted his people. So that's kind of how I learned the ropes. In terms of the front office, there were a number of people that had certain interests in healthcare from time to time. Ken Marin, the long-range planner, had some interest. Greg Stevens at times, his interest wasn't in health. His interest really was what's ever in the newspaper, creating a problem. That was his interest.
How about the governor? Was he interested in health? Health issues?
Not really dramatically so. Not very much. When I got there was a huge urgency regarding hemodialysis doctors. And it was on the front pages, and they just wanted that to go away.
What was the issue? Can you explain it?
I don't really remember.
Okay.
I do remember how we solved it.
Go ahead.
But I don't remember what the issue was.
How'd you solve it?
But we solved it by saying whoever was complaining, these group of physicians and nephrologists, I guess, they were upset. We met at all of them, we met at some bar in Princeton. And we basically said at 10 o'clock at night, we're not going home until this thing is done. That we have a deal. And we just stayed on it until we got a resolution, and that was it. And they all signed off on it, and we went on our merry ways.
Did the fact that Kane was focused on education and other issues mean that you had more freedom?
I think it did. And we had a wonderful time running that. There was very little interference with what we were doing. It worked very well. But I always got to see the governor. You kind of learn every administration is different, so I don't know how it works currently. But I would see the governor when he was between speeches, because he would go from one environment to another in a car with a driver. State trooper was driving him. So, and I had a driver in those days. I don't know if they still do, but I had a driver. So we just go to point A. When he finished his speech, I'd get in the car with him. We'd go to point B. My car would follow, and we'd had our conversation, and I'd say goodbye. So I had plenty of access. It was a technique that worked very well.
Say that again. When he was giving a health-related speech?
No, any speech. It was just his schedule.
If you needed to see him,
That's
you
how
would
I
see
would
him
see
in the car.
Right.
Your car would take you to his car.
Right.
And you would get the half hour between
Exactly.
on the road.
Which is all I ever needed. Explain them what's going on, what the issues were, laid them out what the options were, and ask for direction. And so we get these things done quickly.
Were they good exchanges?
Absolutely. Oh, he was focused. I mean, there was no question. When we were sitting down for these issues, he was focused. I don't really remember specifically which issues that I went to him like that, but these things do happen.
Did you work on any issues that are still resonating today?
Yeah, they've never changed.
They've never changed?
They've never changed.
What are the issues?
Well, today the issue is, for me, in my current position, is physician supply. So that's the main issue. And that's graduate medical education funding, how we train physicians. It's the mix of doctors. We have we're number one in foreign physicians. Physicians have been educated in international medical graduates.
Why are we number one in?
Well, that's an interesting question. It's not like there's an easy answer to it, but I think the answer is that first of all, there are about 18,000 medical students in this country that we graduate every year. And I believe there are about 26,000 residency slots. So the American graduates fill up those residency slots, leaving a capacity for others. And the rest of these slots are filled by physicians that have graduated overseas or in the Caribbean. They can still be Americans, but they've gone overseas. And so as we produce more doctors for medical schools, by the way, I just want to point out it does nothing for the physician supply in our country. It only means we're more American and less foreign. But why? So why is New Jersey so foreign? It's my opinion that these American graduates desire to go into the best teaching hospitals that they can find around the country.
And those are out of state.
And apparently, those aren't here, not in sufficient numbers. And that really gets back to the reputation of the teaching hospitals, and the reputation starts at the top from UMDMJ on down. All right, we do have some amazing hospitals here, all right, but in terms of being on the map nationally as the place to train in cardiology or whatever, apparently we don't really enjoy that kind of reputation. Now, so we get the foreign medical graduates. Now, the foreign medical graduates are the best and brightest of the countries they come from. We are not getting an intellectually weaker physician, but we are getting a physician who culturally may not be exactly the same as New Jerseyans. So I don't know.
Although New Jerseyans are getting
highly
more
diverse.
too.
Yeah, but these people are diverse differently. A lot from Pakistan, a lot from India. This is how the thing is shaped up. So, how do you change that? You change that by recruiting better teachers, by better instructors, by putting more money into the graduate medical education system.
And were you working on that issue back in the health department days?
No, that wasn't my issue then. It is my issue now.
Was there a physician supply issue back in the 80s?
No. This has gone back and forth for a number of years. They keep creating commissions. Back then, there were too many doctors. They were putting the brakes on it. Because there was the belief of if you have a physician and he sees a patient, he's going to spend money. He's going to work that patient up whether the patient needs it or not. So one way to control the healthcare budget is have fewer physicians. They order the test. You don't have one, you don't get the test ordered, you save money. And that was the attitude. And their thought back then by many of the physician entities was that there were too many. Like a trade union, they want to protect the number of docs that are being produced. So they put the brakes on it, and they overdid it.
Is there an undersupply today?
Oh, yes. Yes. And we can't do anything about it unless we increase the number of residency slots, which are capped by the federal government. So it's not like UMDMJ, which may have 350 residents, could say, okay, let's get 400. Right? They can't. They're stuck with the number they have. Secondly, New Jersey has a retention problem. We'd like to keep 50 or 60% of those that finish the residencies here. But in fact, the latest go-around from the exit surveys, which our organization conducts, is 37% stay. 63% are leaving.
Are malpractice rates a reason for that?
And sometimes they say that, but it's a very small factor today.
Is it?
Yeah. It used to be, a big bright, for New Jersey. But there's some 20 companies that are providing it. It's a competitive marketplace. They have tweaked a lot of the laws that surround how attorneys, how you bring a case and expert witnesses. So they've made it tighter. It's not the way the doctors would like to see it yet, but it's much, much better than all the screaming that took place in Trenton 5 or 7 years ago.
Right. I remember there was a lot of that.
Yeah.
Did you do any work with colleagues in other states when you were commissioner?
I knew the New York Health Commissioner. I made a point of getting to know him, David Axelrod, a very fine human being, and they've done yeoman's work in it, but he died on his watch. It was very sad. But our problems were very similar, so I worked with his office, him. I think it was the only one.
How about the legislature? Did you get involved with anybody in the legislature? The chairman of the health committee, or?
I had warm relationships, but I wasn't political. I didn't really know much about these individuals or how the whole thing worked. I didn't know about political bosses. I didn't know anything about really what was happening. They were just people. They would tell me what they wanted. I didn't see a complicated agenda. I would try and be forthright and helpful as best I could. I went to China though with Chuck Hardwick and John Russo. So I got to know those two.
And Senate President.
I got to know those individuals as a result of that trip.
What was that trip about?
That was an exchange program. We had a sister state. New Jersey has a sister state in China, and I don't remember the name of it, but we have it, and then we had a relationship, and there was an individual in the cabinet. They maintain these kinds of relationships. So we had a Chinese outpost, if you will. And so as a result of that, they set up this trip. It was sponsored. I don't know who sponsored it, who paid for it, maybe the Chinese government. And I got to meet the Chinese health commissioner. I was shown hospitals. I was driven around in a big car that came from Russia, a big black sedan. Everybody was driving bicycles. That was in the 70s now. I mean, this was 85, around 1985, and things were very different than they are today in China.
How were their hospitals?
Oh, they were out of another century.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. They were something, pictures you'd see of the 1880s or something. I mean, they were really strange. I mean, it was unbelievable.
And Hardwick and Russo were with you as you toured these hospitals?
No, they were doing other things. I was doing the health thing. They were doing whatever they were doing. But we'd all out, in the evening get together for dinner and banquets. And, we were toasted and feted and treated like VIPs.
Let's talk about Tom Kean a little bit. What was he good at? What was he less than perfect at?
Well, he was good at separating the wheat from the chaff on issues. I mean, he wasn't getting into the weeds in these things. He was taking, a bigger picture of how things needed to work, or what would need to happen. And when I came to him screaming, we got this emergency. What do we do? And so he was always calm, level-headed, thoughtful, asked the right questions. Sometimes we'd have to get back to him on whatever was the information he needed to make a decision. He was careful. He didn't shoot from the hip.
He didn't shoot from the hip?
He did not shoot from the hip. He is not like our current governor. He did not shoot from the hip.
Did he have a weakness?
Well, there was different sides to the Tom Kean that I knew. There was the public persona where he'd stand up and give a speech. And over time, he really learned to give a great speech. He became someone you wanted to listen to. When he went up on the stage, you just couldn't wait for him to talk. But privately, he was rather diffident. He was quiet and thoughtful, and I always felt that I had to carry my end of the conversation to keep it going, which was kind of different, long pauses. So it took me a while to figure into that as how do we converse when we're not talking about business. When we're talking about business, I'm really just presenting and he's listening and asks a few questions and I answer. But when you're sitting with him and there's nothing else going on and you're maintaining a conversation, he's quiet and he's thoughtful.
You think he was a good communicator?
Yeah, I think he's very effective, both on the stage and in person and in private settings.
What did you see him as being most involved in? What were the issues that he grabbed hold of?
Well, I know he was very concerned about higher education. he hung out with the higher education commissioner, and he was very much involved in the education of children and higher education as well. So I think that was what his forte was, or his keenest interest in it. DEP and the health department, we were fighting fires. We were a fire department. I mean, things were just popping all over the place. But, as I said, with this dioxin, the EDB, the AIDS epidemic, I mean, it just kept rolling in us. It hasn't been like that. I figured that was the job. But
you don't think it's been like that for subsequent health commissioners?
I don't think it's been as bad. We've had some infectious diseases running around, that we need to vaccinate people for. We're all excited about birds flu or whatever it is, but not to. Well, they did have to do with how to handle terrorism and emergencies. So the health department went through a big phase on that with a lot of funding and set up some good systems that are effective without terrorism, actually, so that you can monitor what's happening in emergency rooms and know if people are getting sick. They all have fevers, and from a communicable disease point of view, you can track what's happening in the public health world in ways that you could not when I was there.
Do we have a good public health apparatus?
I think we do, but I'm not close to it anymore, and I don't know the people working on it. There have been a lot of budget cuts, and I'm not certain at what level the health department is currently performing.
What did you do about the EDB situation? You say it was a pesticide on fruits and vegetables coming into this country?
Right.
How did you deal with that?
Well, people get very excited, and so you try and calm the public. That's how you deal with it. You simply say, okay, this product is coming in, and we're going to wash our foods differently now. We'll make certain they're washed down, and the EDB is removed. Commercially, they're going to be washed down, or you better wash them down at home? Which? Both.
Both.
Yeah, it was just common sense. Alarms go off when these things get reported that they're dangerous, but all of the food coming into this country was getting treated with EDB, and that was designed to kill germs. So, which way do you want to go on that?
Did you have much contact with the CDC when you were health commissioner?
The health departments always do. We're a reporting entity, so that as we take in the information from our physicians and hospitals of communicable diseases that CDC is tracking, we report it to them. And they have a weekly mortality and morbidity report that they put out, and we always tracked everything. So we were part of that. It's like an extension of CDC in terms of how the public health departments function.
The CDC has a very, very high reputation nationally. Mm-hmm. Its word is taken as gospel. Yeah. Rightly so? Or?
I think so. It can be politicized, so I'm not certain how well it worked under some of these presidents. But generally speaking, NIH and the CDCs, these are the Excaliburs of American medicine.
You were in the administration at a time when Tom Kean was running for re-election.
Right.
What do you remember about that campaign?
I remember he won it on a landslide. It wasn't even close. But I wasn't a political person. I wasn't Roger Bodman in the cabinet. All right, I was a doctor, and that's how they saw me, and that's what I did. And I would give speeches talking about what the health department did and what we were doing. So I was just considered a professional within this cabinet. I was not considered a political person, and still don't consider myself a political person.
He ran against Peter Shapiro. Did you know Peter Shapiro?
Not really. I mean, I must have met him.
You knew who he was?
Yeah, no, I met him at whatever events that come up on the schedule that you meet people.
You say you were not a political person. Did you stay in touch with Phil Kaltenbacher, who had brought you into the administration?
No, he later moved to Florida. There may have been one or two communications over the years, but not very much. No. Yeah, he moved away.
Why did you leave the Kean administration?
Well, it wasn't my plan. It was a diversion from what I intended to do. And
when did you leave the Kean administration?
After the end of the first administration, after his victory. It was time to move on.
What'd you do?
I joined a company, an organization that ran healthcare companies. They were infusion care, nursing homes, those kinds of things. It wasn't a good fit for me.
Where was it?
It was in New Jersey. So I moved on shortly after that, and basically started my own consulting company and went back to doing the things that I had done before.
Was it a difficult decision to leave, or was it clear to you that you had served your purpose?
Yeah, well, I was young. It's nice when you're old and take these jobs. You top off your career, and that's the end of it. But I was still in the middle of my career, and
did you want to parlay having been commissioner into something bigger?
Yeah, sure, I would have liked to, but that really didn't happen.
Were they surprised or disappointed when you told them you were leaving?
No, they were. I think they were pleased because Ken Marin had hired Molly to help him on health issues or whatever it was he wanted to think about.
Molly Coy?
Molly Coy, and so she was being groomed to come in, follow me.
Uh-huh. Did you know her?
Well, I met her when she came to New Jersey. I didn't know her before.
She came from California?
I don't remember. I know she went to California. I don't remember if that's where she started from.
At some point, you became the head of the New Jersey Council of Teaching Hospitals.
Mm-hmm.
What is that? What is that?
What is that? It's a trade association. It's not unlike the Hospital Association, except our mission is narrower. We only accept hospitals that have teaching programs in it, and so we currently represent about 12 major hospitals. There are only 3 that are not currently members of the organization. They have been, but there are always issues with members. We also operate the Council of Children's Hospitals, which has all 10 certificated children's hospitals as members. And we are about to form a third council, which would be the Council of Minor Teaching Hospitals, since there is now a need to bring them together so that they can have a more focused approach.
You say 12 of the 15 teaching hospitals are part of your association?
Of the major teaching hospitals, the major are those that have more than 75 residents.
And there are about 70 or so hospitals total in New Jersey.
Right, there are about 70 total hospitals, about 40 are teaching, and about a dozen are major teaching.
Uh-huh. And are you Trenton-based? Is that where you're?
The office is in Trenton. It's an advocacy organization, so that we testify in front of the appropriations and health committees and do those things. We've been very successful, by the way.
How so?
Well, the GME on our watch in the last 4 years has gone up $70 million. So that's a considerable bump.
The GME,
Graduate Medical Education Funding.
Uh-huh.
And
has gone up $70 million in this climate?
In the last 4 years. And even in this climate, we got a $30 million bump. Now, we'll see if it holds, because the Supreme Court issue on funding education is still being grappled with. But if his proposed budget holds, we'll have an increase of $30 million.
And we just had a task force, I guess it was Tom Kane's task force,
yes,
on higher education, that recommended once again what the Vagelos Commission recommended 6 years ago?
In some form, yeah. Tom's, Governor Kane's task force really did not study the issue. They simply said, these other reports make sense to us, this looks like a good idea, but we don't have the resources to study it, so we're going to recommend another task force take a closer look at it. And that was about the extent that they waded into the water.
And do you have a position on whether, I guess it's moving the Robert Wood Johnson Medical School out of UMDNJ and into Rutgers? Am I saying it correctly?
Yeah, right. It's an interesting story, because it started at Rutgers in the first place, and they didn't want it. Rutgers gave it up and gave it to what became UMDNJ. And in many parts of the country, the medical schools are attached to the universities. But when Rutgers gave it up, it was just
When did Rutgers give it up?
I don't know.
50s, 60s, 70s?
When Stan Bergen came around. So
okay.
Probably
late 60s, probably.
Probably late 60s, 70s. Maybe. It was a new organization, really, I mean, fundamentally. And it takes 100 years to grow a medical school to build a reputation. The Harvard Medical School, Penn, I mean, they're well over 100 years old. So it's not something you snap your fingers and say, okay, let's form a medical school and things will be great. It takes a long, long time. So Rutgers had a medical school. It wasn't going well, I guess. They gave it up. UMDNJ was formed. It had a different name back then, but it was formed. And it prospered under the leadership of Stan Bergen. And he was just he was one of the New Jersey greats in terms of what he accomplished. He built this thing from nothing to the largest healthcare educational university program in the country, because he put up nursing schools, dental schools, and osteopathic schools. I mean, he just did an amazing, amazing job. So they were prospering. UMDMJ was doing great. But, things became, his strength wasn't in management per se. And when he left, apparently he didn't leave a good management team behind. And things kind of went awry to some extent. And anyway, so they had built a whole campus, a medical school out in Piscataway, and we're very close to Rutgers, and so over a period of time, that school developed a relationship with Robert Wood Hospital, which changed its name to Robert Wood. It had been Middlesex County Hospital before that, but changed its name, and they started doing extremely well, brilliantly so, and they helped reverse the out-migration to New York. This was under the leadership of Harvey Holzberg. And they just grew this thing like you wouldn't believe. So it became very successful. And of course, now Rutgers takes a look at this thing and says, So that's what's going on. I mean, Rutgers would like to have that piece, and somebody else would like to pick up University Hospital. And as a result of the investigations and the prosecutors and all that craziness that went on, nobody went to jail, by the way. No wrongdoing was found.
You're talking about at UMDNJ,
except
which the current governor took over on behalf of the federal government when he was U.S. attorney.
Right. So what do you think that did to the reputation of UMDNJ and its ability to attract the top physicians and the ability to attract the top students?
What did it do?
It hurt it. It hurt it. They left. They left. The best and the brightest left because they were highly desirable.
Is that why people are talking about reconstituting it at Rutgers so it can get a fresh start?
No. It's because the people at Rutgers want. The Robert Wood is considered the gem of it. So that's why they want it.
Will your association take a position on the issue?
No. Well, we cannot. We cannot. UMDMJ is a member, Cooper's a member. They're all members. And that's the thing about a trade association. There's some issues you just can't touch.
Will you keep going with this for a while, with the trade association?
Right. I'm having fun. It's an interesting job. It really is very much like being the health department all over again.
How so?
Well, we wrote the physician manpower study, which the health department should have done. We're making the recommendations on how to improve the physician supply. We're doing the resident exit surveys. We're effective in getting the Board of Medical Examiners to ask survey questions now when physicians get relicensed, so we can accurately count how many doctors we have in the state. We never knew. Just because they renewed a license didn't mean they were practicing. So we need to know, are you practicing? How many hours per week? What is your practice? What do you do when you practice? This kind of questions so that we can plan accordingly. When do you plan to retire? We need information about the physician workforce. So now we're getting them.
And how do you look back on your 3 years in government?
It was an interesting period for me, but just on a personal basis, I had a great time. In terms of the benefit to the state of New Jersey, I think we did a pretty competent job. The prices were stabilized. There were no nursing strikes or anything happened. I mean, we ran an efficient, effective healthcare system, and a lot of the problems diminished. The public health side was exciting, but we dealt with all those situations that they came up. So I had no particular agenda when I went to the health department, and I just went in there cold. It is now my view that when you take those kind of jobs, you need to sit down in the first day or the first week and say, there are 3 things I intend to get done before I leave, because you will be crushed by the daily inbox. You will never have time to go back to say, okay, these are the important things. So I think you need to be very clear on what you intend to accomplish in these positions, and you can't have more than 3. I mean, that's it. And you need to sedulously create a plan to go about doing those 3 things while you're doing everything else.
Have you encountered Tom Kane much over the years?
Yeah, we bump into each other, oddly from time to time. I ran into him once in New York City. Another time we took a train back from Washington together not too long ago, sat together for a couple hours. So, yeah, and we see each other at various events. He's always being honored and whatnot. And I try to attend those when he's being honored.
Anybody else from the administration that you're in touch with?
I talk to Roger Bodman from time to time because he's still involved. He's political. That's about it.
How do you regard Tom Kaine's 8 years as governor?
Well, he's clearly New Jersey's most popular governor. And you know, that all stems from character and integrity. Those are the qualities that ultimately count. And that's what the man has, just throughout his body, is character and integrity. It's a pleasure to work with, to be with, to hang with.
And what should the people of New Jersey remember him for?
Well, in this highly charged political environment, as far as I'm concerned, it makes sense to be a moderate. The extremes get nothing done. All they do is yell and throw bombs at each other. If you want to get something done, you got to get it done in the middle, and you got to bring both sides together. He had a split government, and that was probably very helpful to him. That the legislature was a different party. At least one of the houses, as I recall, was different. And that when
in his second term, one of the houses was different. In his first term, they were both Democrat.
Yeah, when they're all the same party, you get to run the table, and that could lead to very bad government. When you control everything, you don't need to listen to anybody. You just do whatever you want. And so a split form of government can get a lot done, but I guess the way it works nationally is that there seems to be something built into it that in the primaries that you run to the extremes, and when you get the extremes in the government, everybody in the middle, and the thing can't work. So it's a problem America hasn't quite figured out how to solve yet.
So he was
a moderate.
He was a moderate.
He was absolutely a moderate.
And it was about character and integrity at bottom.
Absolutely.
All right. Let's leave it there.
Thank you.
Thank you.